A while ago I got this picture frame and it was the wrong size, so in this video I'm going to try to incorporate it into the miniature hobby. Yeah, that's right, as I just said in the intro, I got this picture frame a while ago and it was not the right size for the picture that I had in mind, and it's kind of been sat in my office doing nothing ever since. And recently I came up with the idea of maybe trying to do something with it. Initially it was the idea of a diorama, but that's a bit too much for, this is too big, I think, for my first attempt at a diorama. I'd like to try and scale it down a little bit. So instead, the idea that I've come up with is, to be honest, it's kind of close to a diorama, except I'm not making the miniatures part of it per se. Instead I'm going to make a nice stand for them. So I'm going to try and come up with a battlefield where it starts in one corner, like one team versus another team in the other corner, and I'm going to try and carve out little circles which will fit the bases of some miniatures so that I can display some of my models in a cool way. This is going to be a very experimental process, so let's dive straight into it, sit back and enjoy my exploration. Okay, so what is the plan here? So far, let me just move that. So far I don't really have one. I'm thinking it's going to be a deserty sort of terrain. It's going to match the basing of my Orks, Dark Angels and Tyranids, because they all have the same basing scheme, for the pure fact that I like the idea that they could exist on the same planet. And that's going to become quite handy here, obviously. So it's probably going to be out of those three armies. I'm thinking probably going to go over Orks, because they're kind of my flagship army, at least for the channel. I don't know who to do other than that. I think I might do Tyranids, because these kind of displays and whatnot, it's always Imperium, isn't it, versus Xenos. Ooh. And I kind of like the idea of it being two separate Xenos armies. Okay, let's get rid of that. Now, one thing I would like to do is incorporate water. Some of my favourite bases that I've done have some kind of puddle or something on it. So I like the idea of this edge being raised, kind of like a mound, sloping down, having a little river going through the middle, and then a more flat area over here where the opposite army is. Yeah, I'm thinking maybe have the Orks on one side of the river with the risen up bit, have my warlord, my war boss, I don't know, a couple inches above the surface, and then some boys and stuff in front of him getting ready to fire upon some Tyranids, which I think would be quite cool. Maybe go for the more troops sort of choices, so like your Hormagaunts, Termagants, Genestealers or something where I can create a bit of a swarm looking kind of thing going across the river. Yeah, okay. So this is the idea that I've come up with. We've got a range of Ork units charging from this side, and we've got the war boss in the corner slightly elevated, and we're starting to see some of the Tyranids, like in the form of spore mines, getting across the river, which is obviously going to be running down the middle here. And then on this side we've got my old one-eye model, potentially my favourite Tyranid that I've painted. Get back over there, please. And a little drizzle of Genestealers ready to swarm across the river. And I'm going to line these two up purposefully, because I think this is my favourite posed Ork boy, because the arm is from an Ork knob, and it really looks like he's aiming, which you don't normally get. They kind of just look a bit clueless normally, so I think that's really cool. Creates quite a dynamic scene here, as if those getting ready to blast the brains of an oncoming Genestealer. Okay, my next step is going to be either to drill out some of the gun barrels, because I know that annoys a lot of people. The shooters are done, but not the tiny shooters. No, choppers, sluggers. Yeah, not the sluggers, but the shooters are all drilled out. So it's either going to be that or starting to carve out the ground using some clay. Once I decided what units I wanted where, it was time to start creating the battleground. To do this, I got out some clay. Now, I know what you might be thinking, that seems like an awfully heavy duty thing to be using, but I have it. I have some clay, I wanted to do this project, couldn't be bothered to buy any milliput or anything online, so I just thought, screw it, let's just use it. I started by using a Posca pen, you could use a Sharpie or whatever, just to sketch out on the glass of the picture frame where I wanted the land to be. I wanted to have a river running through the middle of this, so I decided to sketch out where the banks of the river would be. Once I was done with that, it was a matter of grabbing clumps of clay and moulding it where I wanted it. I wanted to cover up all the areas that were going to be obviously the land and leave the riverbed a bit more recessed. As I said before, I decided I was going to make the orcs on a bit of a hill, so I tried to slope it up in the corner. And whilst the clay was still wet, I went round with the miniatures that I wanted to place on the thing when it was finished and pressed their bases into the clay, and this would create an indentation in the clay which I could later slot them into. On some units this worked really well, on others it didn't. There was such a thin layer of clay underneath the Tyranids that their indentations weren't that deep and they don't really sit in their pocket quite as well. This is just part of the learning curve, and if I was ever to do this again, obviously I would elevate the whole lot to try and make their little slots a bit more prevalent. Once I was happy with the general layout, it was time to put this thing aside to dry. I left it in my airing cupboard for a day or so, giving it a full opportunity to dry out, and then once I was done with that, it was time to get it out and apply some texture. To start with, I'm just going to wax some PVA glue everywhere and apply sand to get that nice earthy texture all over the battlefield. I tried to avoid the slots where the miniatures were going to go as best I could, as I didn't want to apply any texture to that at a risk of making them unable to fit in their pockets. Whilst I could have easily left it here, I thought it looked a bit barren, and so I decided to take some bits out of my bits box for the Orks and Tyranids and splatter them about. This is going to include some discarded weapons, some bullets and stuff for the Orks, and then maybe little parts of Tyranids once they've already been blown to smithereens and have been washed down river. I would then glue them in place. The Tyranid bits will go in the riverbed to, like I just said, make it look like they have been washed down river, and the Orc stuff would mainly reside on their side of the river. I decided to zenithal prime the scene, and that was so that I could apply some light areas and dark areas in the same go and use quite a thin layer of paint, which would then have the shadows and highlights show through. When it came to painting, I went ahead and did all the individual pieces like the Tyranid bits and the weapons, then I moved on to the ground. And to do this, I tried to match the basing scheme for all the miniatures, and that is Steel Legion drab, some kind of wash, and then a dry brush of Ushabti bone and Screaming Skull. Now I whacked the Steel Legion drab everywhere and decided to make the riverbed a sort of purpley red colour. I'll jump in between different colours using the Steel Legion drab, the purple, the red and all that to try and wet blend in the riverbed, try and make it look a bit more organic and not quite as jaded. And then when I was done with that, I moved on to the washes, and I used quite a few. I used multiple colours just to try and make it look a bit more interesting. For the riverbed I used a mainly green wash, and then as we went up onto the banks it was a mix of sepias and earth tones. I also threw some reds in here and there just to make it look a bit more interesting and so that it wasn't all exactly the same. Once all these washes are dried, it was a simple case of dry brushing over the whole base with a Ushabti bone and a little bit of Screaming Skull. Now as a finishing touch I decided I was going to add some foliage, and to do this I used some of the Citadel little plant thingies. They might be called like brutal bracken or something mean and unnecessary. I painted up a few of those individually and then just glued them on around the riverbank, because that's where the moisture is, that's where the plant's going to grow and stuff. And then once that was done, it was time to apply my water effects. And I need to invest in some resin of some kind. I can't keep using this Woodland Scenics water effects. If I'm going to stick with Woodland Scenics, I need to get their actual water, not their water effects, because the water effects is meant to make nice ripples and stuff. It's quite a sculptable thing, and it's really thick and takes forever to dry. So I need to invest in something that dries quicker and it's nice and clear. What I did was I just squirted this all along the riverbed and then spread it out using a paintbrush and let it dry. The drying time took a few days. It will dry and you'll be able to work with stuff within a day, but the actual water effects will remain quite cloudy for a number of days. As a finishing touch, I applied some grass tufts around the base and then popped on all the miniatures, and we were finished. So I suppose it's time for a grand reveal. So, what do you think of this project? I, for one, am not so sure. I enjoyed the process and I'm glad I did it, but at the same time it's not quite as cool as I hoped it would look. I would consider doing it again and change a few things. We'll see. But yeah, let me know how you think it went. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more stuff that I'm producing, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, and who knows, maybe that little bell icon. It's up to you don't have to. Who cares? Make sure to check out the links in the description if you want to support this channel in other ways, and until next time, I will see you later.